Morning, everybody. Welcome to the meeting of Growth and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel. Can I remind attendees that this meeting is webcast and ask that mobile phones please be put on silent. Before we move on to the formal agenda, I'd like to do a round of introductions. So I am Councillor Zarina Amin. I'm the chair of this panel.
Chris Friend, Co-op T.
Tim Bamford, Dimmerdale Ward.
Donna Bellamy, Home Valley North Ward.
Alison Munro, Almonbury Ward.
Harry McCarthy, Home Valley Ward.
Councillor Graham Turner, Cabinet Member for Finance, Regeneration and Economic Growth.
Councillor Moses Crook, Deputy Leader but also Cabinet Member for Housing, Homelessness and Transport.
Thank you. Officers, please.
Apologies for that. Phil Jones, Director of Service for Homes and Neighbourhoods.
Liz Jefferson, Acting Head of Housing Growth.
Joanne Bartholomew, Director for Development.
Jo Scrutiny, Group Leader for Planning and Policy.
Thank you. I believe we have an extra member here.
Councillor John Taylor.
Thank you, everybody. Membership of committee, there have been no apologies for the meeting. Minutes of the previous meeting. Can I ask panel members if they're happy to approve that by a show of hands? Those are approved. Thank you. Declaration of interest. Do any members have anything to declare? If you do, you know to fill in the forms. Admission of the public. I believe there's no public items, and all agenda items will be considered in public session. Deputations and petitions.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Public question time. Have we received any questions from members?
No public questions, Chair.
We'll now move on to the internal assessment of compliance with the Regulator of Social Housing Consumer Standards. Would the Cabinet Member like to present the item? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. So this report provides an update on our compliance with the Regulator of Social Housing's Consumer Standards and forms part of our process of internal assessment and validation ahead of any inspection by the Regulator of Social Housing, and which all registered providers, including council landlords, are rightly subject to. As with other public sector inspection regimes, the timing of any inspection is not for us to determine, so it is right that we maintain constant assurance work on our readiness for inspection and, by implication, our compliance with the consumer standards. In reality, my first priority is to serve our tenants, and so compliance with and exceeding the standards is our principal focus, with readiness for inspection a corollary of this primary objective. We have sought external validation on our internal assessment from the David Tolson Partnership to give further assurance that assessments are robust and so that we can identify any areas for improvement. The Homes and Neighbourhood Service have undergone a substantial transformation over the last 2 years, meaningfully resolving deficits in services, particularly around damp, mould and condensation, fire safety and water testing, but also shifting to be more tenant-focused so that services reflect tenant voice throughout. Key to our improvement is our stock condition survey work, which is underway and which will ensure we have up-to-date information on condition of all of our homes, helping us to achieve and maintain high standards. This area of compliance against the safety and quality standard does still remain an area of focus and improvement for us. We have addressed areas where we had not been meeting the standards we would wish to deliver, but the focus of successful social landlords, in my view, is to constantly seek ways to improve and to better serve our tenants. The only purpose of Kirklees Homes and Neighbours is to serve our tenants, and this internal assessment will further help us to refine delivery against that overarching objective. Obviously, my aspiration and the aspiration of the service is to achieve the highest C1 rating and therefore be in the top 11% of council house providers. So I want to be clear that we are on a pathway towards that standard. This report provides assessment of where we currently sit against each of the standards, and I will hand over to officers if they want to provide any more detail of the specific assessments that have been undertaken, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the benefit of committee, you'll note within the report that we're assessed against 4 areas on the consumer standard, 3 of which are showing at C2, which is positive, one of which will come as no surprise to committee, given recent reports, shows as C3. It's important to note that although overall we're demonstrating good performance across all of that, some of the issues that we are still working through in our safety and quality standard may determine us as a C3 overall. And other than that, I think portfolio holders have done a very good job of kind of introducing the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Munro.
I'd just like to, it's a question just in relation to what you've just said, actually. So 2.3.1 of the report on page 13, compliance, 3 of the 4 consumers are C2 level. Gaps remain in safety and quality. So my question is, what are the challenges here? What are you, that's hindering progress on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. A good question. So the challenges relate to timeliness. As Councillor Crook just mentioned, we've got an awful lot of effort and work going into our stock condition survey at the moment. That process is currently scheduled to take 3 years for full completion to get us to 100% data across that. That is our primary challenge. What we are doing is we're not stopping and waiting for that information, so we are continuing to work through the challenges that we see, particularly around fire safety, but other hazards as well that are within our properties. We're currently in the process of working with our contractor, Watts Group, to look at whether we can accelerate that programme and try and bring that back within 12 months. We have the required management processes in place to keep our tenants safe, but clearly risk being removed quicker is the ideal solution. So I'd say that will be our key challenge.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chair.
Councillor Crook.
Yeah, just very quickly to add, I think it's really important to note that the Homes and Neighbourhood Service is a ring-fenced service, so all of the money that we have comes from tenants, and it is important to balance disruption to tenants, value for money for tenants, against immediate compliance, coming from a place where we weren't compliant with all of the standards in the way that we would wish to do so. So Phil quite rightly identified that mitigations are in place and no tenants are put at risk. But if we went in and, you know, in an extreme circumstance, rebuilt the houses to be fully compliant straight away, where would our tenants live? So you have to balance, there has to be a balance, and the primary focus for me is safety of tenants and serving our tenants, and that will mean that we're not fully compliant in the way that we would want to at a C2 or C1 level in every standard immediately. Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the appendix on page 23, I think the report is in black and white, but there's some red, amber, green actions, which it's not possible from the report to figure out where we are with those. And also, there's 3 columns where it says July, October, January, and they're distinguished between circles and squares. I've got no idea what do the circles and the squares mean. But just on the safety and quality standard stuff, I mentioned it would take a while for the stock condition survey to complete. First of all, are we likely to get that done in time for a C2 level at the next inspection? And also, what are the main challenges to conducting that stock condition survey? What are the things that we've found while we're doing that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the report, Councillor, I'll make arrangements for a colour copy or to be emailed so that you can see the difference. I think that will help. What the colour coding shows is a trend of progression throughout, so I think it will be quite helpful for you to have that. With regard to the stock condition survey, timing-wise, we anticipate being inspected probably over the summer months of this year, so we aren't going to get to a position where we're going to have full stock condition data in advance of an inspection. Nor would the regulator expect us to be in that position, and we're certainly not on our own in that. We know across the sector, but particularly with regards to local authorities, we are very similar to where other authorities have been with that. What the regulator would expect from us is to have a clear plan in place for knowing our data well, understanding the stock to the best of our ability. So being very clear about how we've managed data through that system and what that data means. And we are on track to have that information in place and in a compliant format in advance of an inspection. So that would be the key first point. What the regulator would also expect us to do is to be considering the acceleration of a programme where it takes 3 years. So I think, again, the ability to demonstrate that we're having those conversations and looking at the practicalities of what does that mean for us financially, operationally, but also for our tenants in terms of disruption and minimising any disruption to tenants will be key factors in that. So I think where I would like us to be when we're inspected is to have a very good understanding and to be able to demonstrate a very good understanding to the regulator of our stock condition position, and to be able to give them a very clear forward plan about how we'll move forward and deliver that stock condition data in a timely or as timely manner as we can. What they will also expect at the back end of that conversation is a really clear link between stock condition survey data outcome and our investment programme. And as committee will know, Cabinet approved our investment programme recently in terms of the money that we're looking to spend. I think it's a figure of £390 million has been included in there. So it's how that data set connects to that investment and making sure that we're prioritising and giving good value to tenants for that investment. In terms of the challenges, in terms of delivery, capacity within the industry is always going to be a challenge. So we are part of the conversation with Watts Group at the moment is, do they have the quality and not just quantity of surveyors? Are they able to do the job that we would want them to do in order to make sure that we are delivering a safe and compliant system and making sure that when they're in our tenants' properties, they are seeing, picking up and reporting the right issues back to us. The secondary challenge that we have often in this arena is with tenants, and I don't mean that in a negative way. Tenants have lives to live, and we're going in and trying to create appointments and challenges to their daily day activity. So we will come up against stock condition surveys, an area where no access is higher in terms of failure rates than generally other services, because it's something we require, not a service a tenant is requiring. So we would generally build in a latency of around about 20% failure rate for stock condition survey, and that does create an issue for us. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at these things, it's not an area where we can force access. So we would intend to get into every one of our properties to complete that work within 12 months. But what I think we'll find towards the back end of the programme is a number of properties that we have to work through a process of condition survey as they become available for condition survey.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Chair. That's a really comprehensive response. Thank you. Just as well on the fire safety remediations, is it the same kind of what we're expecting, that we're working through that backlog and then we're on track to deliver that in a timely fashion?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, thank you, Chair. Fire safety is a little bit different because it is a proactive area of work for us. So we're currently just over 3,000 fire actions outstanding and around about 1,200 overdue. We're in constant monthly engagement with the regulator around that programme, and we've as of last week, we've approved a programme to accelerate our remediation programme from a 5-year programme to a 2-year programme to deliver those safety works much quicker, working with our tenants. So we'll continue to be in monthly engagement with the regulator around that, but they're satisfied, subject to our delivery, that we are on top of that.
Supplementary. Any further questions? All right, I've just one question. Councillor Crook, you mentioned you don't want to create a circumstance where a tenant has to be moved out of the property, but I am sure there will be, or there have been, some circumstances, and if there are, what's the biggest challenge, and how long are the periods, and roughly what percentage are we looking at in terms of properties?
Thanks. So I mean, I'd defer to Phil for numbers on this, but I don't think that we're planning to move substantial numbers of tenants out of their homes as part of the fire safety work programme. So we do maintain a stock of decant properties ready, so that if an emergency situation arises in a home, we would decant someone. The example I was giving is that in shortening the time frame, particularly around invasive fire safety work. So if you're taking someone's front door out, it's not too bad, but if you're working in every room of the house, that's disruptive to their lives, needs to be balanced against the need to comply with the regulations. So from a starting point when we're aware that mitigations are in place to make sure there's no loss of safety, is it justifiable to tick a box in a way that disadvantages either financially or in terms of getting on with their lives tenants excessively? So for example, if you had 2 rolling programs, would you want to time them that took a little bit longer so that a tenant is disrupted once, or would you go into their house, disrupt their lives and then go in straight away again and disrupt it again? So I think there has to be a balance drawn there, both in terms of efficiency cost-wise, but also in terms of disruption to tenants' lives. And that's the point I was trying to make. If if money was no object and you could rebuild your entire stock to be perfect and compliant, that wouldn't be the choice, because your 21,000 households of tenants would be significantly disrupted by that. So it's a balance, but I think that the service has done an exceptionally good job, and I want to identify that in reducing the time frame of the fire safety programme meaningfully and significantly in a way which still gives good value for money, and I've sought that assurance consistently throughout, but also still minimises the disruption to tenants in a way that is acceptable. I think if you went much further, you'd be over the line probably in terms of that balance, but I'm very pleased with the work that's been done. Really positive.
So have there been any circumstances where it's become a bit of a challenge and a tenant has had to be moved out?
So I defer to Phil on that, whether actually individual tenants out of all of that large programme have had to be moved out specifically for fire safety work. I'm only aware of situations where, say, for example, there's been a roof failure or a heating failure or something that's acute and significant where we've had to decant tenants, but I'll defer to Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in terms of our investment programme, we do anticipate that we'll come across particular issues around structural repair and safety issues as we move through the stock profile. Now, we don't think they'll be excessive, and we currently carry 67 properties that we use for decanting and cycling through as part of a repairs process. So that will be adequate for what we need. Probably 2 things that are important to remember. We aren't doing all of this all at once, so it'll be delivered over a 5-year programme, which gives us the opportunity to manage that scale of issue and manage it effectively with tenants. And one of the things I'm always keen to remind staff and contractors is when we go into properties, these are people's homes, not just buildings where we're doing work. So we do need to sensitively manage issues around that, particularly where decant is concerned. With regards to fire safety, it is a little bit different. So we do have a number of properties that we hold vacant to allow us to get in to do significant works. The only time we would consider decanting someone on the grounds of fire safety is if the property wasn't safe and we needed to get in immediately to do that work. We don't currently have any of those properties, so those will be defined as category AA risks, which we don't have any of those. What we will see over the next 2 years is we have some properties that have got significant compartmentation issues, and when we do that work, probably more for tenant relief than safety requirements, we will offer some of our tenants the opportunity to be decanted for the period of works. That process will probably put those individuals into furnished properties for around about a week at a time each, whilst we get in, do everything that's required in that property, and then help them move back in and into the property once it's fully safe. So I wouldn't imagine we would see significant numbers going through that process on either occasion, but it is something that we will closely monitor as a service.
That's good to know. Are there any further questions? Thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Councillor Crook. We'll now move on to agenda item 8, housing growth update. Councillor Crook, would you like to present, please? Is it yours? Or?
No, it's
All
mine.
right.
Don't give.
Sorry, Councillor
Giving him
Turner,
extra
please
work.
present.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick brief introduction before we hand over to officers. As you'll see through the report, there's a lot of good news in here. Things are progressing on many of our difficult sites. So, as I said, a lot of good news in here to be discussed this morning. A lot of positivity. We're still short of our housing target, but the team continually work on ensuring that we can move further towards that target. And we've got an update later on the local plan, which will help fill some of those gaps, hopefully. So thanks very much to the team. It's a very small team, and I think they're overachieving at the moment. So I'll ask Liz to go through in detail the report for you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. So, as I've said, I'm Liz Jefferson, I'm the Acting Head of Housing Growth. And this morning, I'm going to be providing an update on the work of the Housing Growth team over the last 12 months. So I'm going to look at the strategic context in which the team operates, the progress made on strategic sites, town centre living, specialist and affordable homes and market housing, and talk about some of the key learning and challenges we've faced and our priorities looking forward. So, as I'm sure you'll be aware, since coming to power in July 2024, the government's placed a significant emphasis on building new homes and has made a commitment to deliver 1.5 million new homes in the next 5 years, supported by the reintroduction of mandatory housing targets, reform of the planning system and plans for a number of new towns. That commitment to housing delivery is also reflected at a regional level, with one of the mayoral pledges being to build 5,000 affordable homes by 2028. In Kirklees, our current strategic housing market assessment sets out that we need 1,873 homes a year across the district, and we have a housing waiting list in excess of 19,000 people, which demonstrates the acute need for housing across Kirklees. To respond to this, we're delivering a programme of work, and also in the last 12 months, we've produced an updated housing strategy for the period 2026 to 2031. So this draft strategy sets out our vision for ensuring that every resident has access to a suitable, safe and affordable home. And our key focus of the strategy is that we want people to be able to access a suitable home and prevent homelessness. And the strategy addresses that by looking at 3 key areas: housing need, housing quality and housing growth and delivery. So that strategy is set against a backdrop of rising housing need, an ageing population in the district, increased cost of living and widening inequalities. And it sets out a coordinated long-term framework for addressing those housing challenges across Kirklees. So moving on to look at our strategic sites. At Dewsbury Riverside, this is the largest housing allocation in the current local plan. And over the last 12 months, we've continued to make progress, working closely with Homes England. Preliminary market engagement took place with master developers in the summer of last year. And another focus has been the resolution of issues with neighbouring strategic landowners with whom dialogue and negotiation is ongoing. Unfortunately, it's not possible to progress to the procurement of a master developer until these issues have been resolved. We have had recent positive conversations with the relevant landowners, and we anticipate we'll make further progress over the summer. In tandem with that, we've prepared procurement documents so that we'll be ready to issue those as soon as the landowner issues are resolved. And on Bradley Park, this is a council-owned strategic housing allocation that will deliver around 2,000 homes. We previously reported to Scrutiny that strategic acquisitions relating to access needed to be resolved before commencing procurement. 1 strategic property purchase has been completed and another 2 have been well advanced. The properties will be used as temporary accommodation for those in housing need until such time as they're demolished. Again, as with Dewsbury Riverside, procurement documents are ready to be issued once the strategic property issues relating to access are resolved. And those property acquisitions are required to give certainty to prospective bidders around access. So moving on to look at town centre living. I'm sure you're aware that an important part of the blueprint visions for our town centres in Huddersfield and Dewsbury is to increase the number of people living in the town centres. That helps to increase footfall and support and sustain other uses such as retail and leisure. In Huddersfield, estate buildings has been identified as a council asset that can deliver housing and help to create a new housing offer, which would appeal to a new and different market from those currently living in the town centre, particularly graduates from the university who wish to remain in the area. The housing growth team were successful in securing 1.25 million of one public estate brownfield land release funding in 2024, and that's provided grant funding for enabling works and for surplus land and buildings that deliver housing. These enabling works were carried out in 2025. A cabinet report about the proposed delivery route for housing was considered in June last year, and following this, the scheme went out for procurement last month. In Dewsbury, the focus for residential development is on the Daisy Hill area, located between the town centre and the railway station. And residential development's already been introduced into this area through the development of Station Apartments, which is opposite the railway station. A number of acquisitions have been made in the Daisy Hill area, and the overall delivery approach is being developed as part of the Dewsbury long-term plan. Work to market one key property for housing development took place in 2025, and detailed proposals for this building have been received and are now being considered. So moving on to look at where we're delivering specialist homes. On our site at Kenmore Drive in Cleckheaton, we're working in partnership with Housing Association Housing 21 to deliver an 80-unit extra care scheme, all of which will be for affordable rent. This work started on site in February 2024 and has progressed steadily to the point where the building's now wind and watertight. The scheme's expected to complete in late summer this year. At St Paul's Road in Mirfield, we're working with Connect Housing to deliver 13 homes for adults with a social care need. Planning permission's been secured and legal work has been progressed to dispose of the site to Connect. Unfortunately, the only issue currently holding up the transfer of the site has been legal issues with neighbouring properties. However, these are very close to being resolved, and a start on site is expected in the middle of this year. As I touched on when setting the context, we do have a significant housing waiting list, and directly linked to this is the number of individuals and families in temporary accommodation. There's a significant financial cost to the council and human cost to families living in temporary accommodation. And during this year, we've continued to work closely with colleagues in housing services to deliver solutions to address the need for temporary accommodation. During the last 12 months, we've identified a number of potential models for the supply of temporary accommodation and modelled the benefits of those both legally and financially. This detailed work will continue this year with the input of with detailed input from finance and legal colleagues, along with specialist input from the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government. We'll then go on to the identification and procurement of a preferred option. So looking at sites where we're working to deliver affordable homes, on our RP clusters sites, it was reported to Scrutiny in March last year that we were working with Housing Association 13 to deliver 100% affordable housing on 5 sites across the district. Unfortunately, over the course of 2025, detailed site investigation work by 13 has found that 3 of these sites are unviable. One of those sites is being considered for disposal, and alternative options are being explored for the 2 other sites. During 2026, planning decisions and a start on site are expected for 13 sites at Main Avenue and Highmore Lane, Cleckheaton, and these sites will deliver 97 affordable and intermediate tenure homes. And in addition to the direct delivery of homes, we have a specialist team within the service who are the first point of contact for developers on affordable homes and provide formal consultation responses on planning applications, particularly relating to securing homes through the Section 106 process. And as a result of the team's work, 73 affordable homes have been secured through the planning process in 24-25, and we continue to support delivery of partners to secure further affordable housing in 25-26. We also have sites where we're delivering a mixture of affordable and market homes. So our site at Sut Hill in Batley has been supported by the Homes England Accelerated Construction Programme, and the focus has been on delivering homes at pace using modern methods of construction. This was a very difficult site for us to bring to fruition as it's steep, has significant draining issues, and we face very challenging deadlines from Homes England. Overall, the site will deliver 319 homes when complete, of which 43% will be affordable. 211 homes have already either been sold privately or transferred to a housing association on this site, and development will continue at pace over the course of this year with the completion date of December this year. At Fenny Lane in Almondbury, Vista have been appointed as the development partner for this site last year. Work in the last year has focused on legal discussions and Vista engaging with the local planning authority in advance of a planning application. And at Ashview, whilst our team's focus was on the delivery of the council extra care scheme, this site has also delivered 98 market sale and 21 affordable homes, with construction completing last year. So finally, to just reflect on the key learning and challenges we've had over the past 12 months. Obviously, I've mentioned several times we have a significant housing waiting list, and the particular need for social rent homes remains a challenge. But we have started to see a change in proposals that developers are bringing forward to us, particularly in the context of Homes England's new funding programme, and we are seeing more proposals for social rent units. We have had a year where we've experienced a lot of challenges relating to working on infill sites. The challenges of Kirklees geography particularly are hilly environment, leading to significant cost and drainage issues, alongside legacy issues from our industrial and mining past. And unfortunately, that has meant that some sites are not viable. But we continue to explore new and innovative ways of working with partners and of securing funding to address these issues. So looking forward for next year, our focus will be on delivering our strategic sites, delivering housing in town centres, supporting our housing solution colleagues to deliver solutions for temporary accommodation, and supporting local plan colleagues in the delivery of the new local plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Monroe.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, my first question is the number of people on the individuals and families on the housing list, is that figure of 19,000 current, or has it increased since recently, or is that how long has it been at 19,000 basically?
I mean, I'm happy to happy to answer that. The housing waiting list remains a significant challenge for us, and I think it has increased beyond the 19,000 figure. I don't have today's figure for you. It varies, as you'll appreciate. What is also concerning is that we continue to see pressure in terms of homelessness, albeit that housing solutions officers have managed to reduce our demand for homelessness significantly over the last 12 months, as I've mentioned before in this chamber, specifically also in how we address that challenge. So in terms of the types of temporary accommodation that we provide, we've significantly reduced that and prioritised households that include children. So the latest figures I have is that in the last 12 months we've reduced that use of inappropriate temporary accommodation by 2/3. So there's a complex picture, but the overall housing waiting list is a reflection partly of an underlying housing pressure, but also the fact that it's higher compared to other authorities speaks in some respect to our understanding that people should be allowed to aspire to living in a council-owned property, because that is a positive choice that people should be able to make. So there are various levels of acuteness of demand within that headline figure, and actually it's quite useful to break that down and to understand that at the acute end we've got homelessness demand, and we're meaningfully impacting that through upstream intervention, but also meeting that challenge in a better way. And I think Liz has just talked about work that's being done in terms of acquisition of appropriate property to meet some of that demand, but also to understand that there is a spectrum within that waiting list. But yes, it's increasing. I think that's it's perfectly right that we acknowledge that.
Thank you. I've got a couple more questions. So, with regard to, so you'll have people on the list. Sometimes people may actually find alternative accommodation without help from yourselves. So, is there a process in place to make sure that they let you know, so that you haven't got people on this list who have already found alternative accommodation, but they just for some reason haven't let you know. Is that actually...
Yeah, there is. So there's a constant assessment, but also if you don't bid through our Choose and Move, our choice-based letting system for a protracted period of time, then you'll be approached and ultimately removed from the list because you don't need to be on the list anymore. Right. But a lot of the work that we're doing that reduces the homelessness demand is around interventions or support provided to people before they become homeless to help them to find alternative accommodation, and a lot of that's in the private rented sector. So in those circumstances, we would know that they'd found alternative accommodation, and so they'd automatically be removed from the list. But there is more work to do in assessing the people on the list to make sure they still require that
Thank you.
in those numbers.
And my final question, if it's okay, is just on the Fenny Lane site. I just find the statement around the site quite vague. So I just wondered if you could tell me when you're expecting a planning application to be submitted, and the other point I'd just like to ask is when will the site be sold? Thanks.
So we anticipate a planning application later this year from Vistry. The site will only be sold when Vistry have planning permission, and therefore we know the detail of their scheme and are able to value the site on that basis.
Okay. And will that come back to count? Will the report come back to this committee at that point?
The matter already went through Cabinet and the decision was delegated to through to officers at that point. So in answer to your question, no, it won't return to Cabinet.
Right. So it'll just go behind closed doors, so to speak.
No, I would. Councillor Turner wishes to.
It's not behind closed doors, as Joanne rightly points out. This went through Cabinet, and a Cabinet decision has been made and approved to delegate the progression of this site to officers. So it's been an open and transparent process, as is always the case with any disposal. So it's not behind closed doors. It's been approved by Cabinet, and now hopefully we can start to move this really important site forward.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Chair. So just a little bit of clarity, just on the RP Clusters programme. It says that some of the sites were unviable and they're being considered for disposal. So that means that they've not already been disposed of, and the ones that aren't viable potentially could remain within council ownership, or some alternative option could be found, but they won't necessarily be transferred to the ownership of that registered provider. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. Obviously, we don't transfer anything to the RP provider until such point that we believe that the business case stands up and planning permission is exactly the same as in the Fenny Lane situation. Housing, as Liz has illustrated, the construction of housing is incredibly difficult at the moment, and we're finding developers and RPs are struggling sometimes with that, as are we ourselves. So for those sites that don't move forward, we'd then move them back through our own asset strategy to understand if there was an alternative use for us as a council, or if we wish to dispose of to the market. As it stands at this moment, all three of those sites are going through that process.
Supplementary? Councillor Bennaby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question is about how reliant are we on developers providing affordable homes, because I believe that, you know, sometimes a developer will come forward and put in the plans for less than 10, is it? So they don't have to have the affordable homes but then come back. And I just wonder, how reliant are we on them providing so many?
Obviously, developers are obliged, as you've alluded to, through planning policy to provide 20% on sites over 10 units. But what we're doing, for example, as we've touched on through the RP Clusters programme or through our site at Kenmore Drive, is where we've used our own land assets. Obviously, then we've got control to work with registered providers, so with housing associations, to do schemes there that are 100% affordable. But I think also what is encouraging, particularly as we see the new Homes England funding programme coming into play is that even on the sort of sites where they're not obliged, developers aren't obliged under planning policy. So a good example of this is the Black Cat site. We're seeing developers come forward with a proposal for much higher affordable provision than is required by planning policy. And also another example of that is our site at Suthill. It was only required to be developed in line with planning policy, but as I mentioned in the presentation, by working with Keep Moat and in communities, we've got to 43% on there. So my reflection would be that where we have our own land assets, we have more control. Otherwise, the specialist team within our service are working with our planning colleagues to always increase the number of affordable homes and particularly encourage the number of social rent properties. Does that help? Thank you.
Councillor Bamforth.
Yeah, it's just a quick one on the 5-year housing supply. How far behind are we, and is it looking positive or is it looking negative?
Our supply position is under the 5-year target. It has slightly improved in the last 12 months. However, we still do not possess a 5-year land supply. The way to a 5-year land supply is to progress a local plan and get it adopted as practically quickly as you can. Thank you.
Supplementary. Any more questions? Come.
Yeah, Chris. I just wondered if you could give me a little bit more background into this 19,000. I think you said 19,000 on the waiting list. Just wondering what those people's living arrangements are at the moment and what percentage of that waiting list are actually in temporary accommodation and what sort of costs that results to the council.
Yeah, thanks. So most of that waiting list are not homeless at this time. The homelessness is an acute presentation of housing need, and we have a few hundred households in temporary accommodation. Last municipal year, that cost us £7.6 million, I want to say. That order of magnitude. So temporary accommodation is a national, is the presentation of a national housing crisis, and you've heard a lot of the work that's being done to ensure that we have an ongoing supply of the right type of homes to meet that demand here in Kirklees, and that for me is socially rented and truly affordable homes, as has been identified. So a small percentage of the 19,000 are homeless, and within that, we accept a statutory duty to provide accommodation for some of those households, and within that, as I've already said, we will prioritise to make sure that those households, including children, are prioritised and found appropriate accommodation, because in my view, bed and breakfast style temporary accommodation is never suitable or appropriate for households including children. It doesn't give them that best start in life, allow them to get on with their lives, their education, and meet their potential. So I think that investment in their futures is very much worthwhile for Kirklees. Albeit that we still have work to do in that space, but still a 2/3 reduction in the use of that type of accommodation for that acute presentation, while all of this other work is ongoing to provide the right sort of accommodation to meet that demand, is a really positive step that the council have achieved, and very grateful to officers for having achieved that outcome.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Are there any further questions? So I have a few questions. So with regard to the Bradley Park site and the regeneration, you've mentioned moving residents into temporary accommodation. What's the length of that accommodation been, and has there been any challenges in that?
If I can just... sorry, Graham, did you want to go? No. If I can just clarify, where we purchase a property for a strategic need, we're using that then to house people in for temporary accommodation. We've not moved anybody at Bradley into temporary accommodation. What we're doing is we are ensuring a meanwhile use of an asset during the period that we've purchased it for a strategic need, to ensure that that helps us with our issues around temporary accommodation.
Thank you. So moving on to land acquisition. You've mentioned at the beginning of your presentation there's been some challenges with regards to not being able to progress those in certain parcels of land. how difficult has it been, and do you look at potentially compulsory purchasing those or abandoning those? So, I mean, roughly where do we sit?
Okay, so with compulsory purchasing, we would have to be in a position where we had a much firmer strategic view of what we needed. It's a very blunt tool. It's compulsory purchasing, particularly around land acquisition. It's more used, we've used it in the past for building-led acquisition. What I can say in particular about the acquisition of land to move forward is that we are at a point with Dewsbury Riverside where we do see that being resolved over the summer. It's much better that all parties feel comfortable with the direction of travel that we're going in. So I don't anticipate that we'll be moving towards a compulsory purchase mode with that.
As Joanne's pointed out, compulsory purchase is a pretty blunt tool. It's quite expensive and it can take a long time. And if we went back to the landowners that we are negotiating with and said, we're looking at CPO in this, that would instantly probably negate any discussions, wouldn't it? And as we've seen recently, it's better to talk than ending in a battle with someone. So from a strategic point of view, having those ongoing conversations is much better than looking at CPO, because as I say, it's a very long process. And we believe we can get there a lot quicker by negotiating with them, because as Joanne says, we're edging nearer every week, so yeah, it'd be better for us.
Thank you, that's good to know. And lastly, there is a bit in the report which looks at protecting the vulnerable and achieving inclusion. I'd like to know how that would be done in terms of new developments. How do you see that kind of play out? Thank you.
So in terms of protecting the vulnerable and inclusion, Dewsbury Riverside is a real example of that, where we've worked with the community to understand, as we move forward with a master developer for housing on that site, what type of housing would be the right sort of housing for the community that may move into that. So are we looking at properties that support multi-generational living? Are we looking at more properties that are already lifetime homes, so wider doorways, a ground floor bedroom, or the ability to access the first floor easily, turning circles for wheelchairs within all spacious rooms in the property, level access, that type of thing. We've done quite a bit of work around dementia-friendly support in the buildings that we've built out from a service use perspective, so we'd expect that to flow through into this. So it's about understanding the community, working with the community to provide the right type of homes for them, and also in the context of that, understanding how we can reduce the council's ongoing revenue funding. There's no point building homes that need adapting in 20 or 30 years' time when we can see that the majority of people will be cared for within their own home as we move forward over the next few decades.
Councillor Turner?
Yeah, just to add to that, there's also an understanding from builders and the commercial sector now that building homes for life is in their interest, and it doesn't really cost a lot more just to make sure the doors are a bit wider, move your switches around, etc. So when I speak to them, there's a lot more, as I said, there's a lot more understanding of how they can make these homes fit for 30, 40, 50 years of people's lives. So it's gradually moving within the private sector as well as ours. And you look at we've got Ashby, Kenmore Drive, so we're committed to building these extra care homes. They do take time, they do come at a cost, and it's getting them in the right place and working with the right developer to do that. But we are committed to more extra care homes as and whenever suitable land becomes available. So, yeah, we're heavily committed. And I say, if you get the chance, go look at Ashby. It's a fantastic. Have you been? It's great, isn't it? Oh yeah, of course it is, yes. And that was again a challenging development, but obviously stuck with it, and we got there in the end. And it's a fantastic facility. We just need more of them, but it's finding the right land, right developer, and right operators to do that. But yes, we're hugely committed to building more extra care homes because as somebody pointed out earlier, we have an ageing population, and we need these sort of facilities for people to move into as they get into the later end of their lives. So yeah, highly committed. Just need the land and the sites.
Thank you. So yeah, Ashview View is in my ward, and I have seen it, and it is an absolutely brilliant example. But it is good to know that we're not just acquiring land, we're ensuring that the properties are fit for purpose and are there for generations to come. Thank you everybody for that. So we're now moving on to agenda item 9, update on national planning reforms. I believe that is also, we're also looking at some consultation responses on the draft national planning policy framework, and also plan making guidance. So would officers like to present? Thank you.
Well, I'll just say that this is very much a moving piece at this moment in time, and the team, which is relatively small, again, have an awful lot of work to do, keep up with the changing guidance and policy from government, but they are doing a cracking job understanding this, because they send me stuff and it's like dozens and dozens of pages long. It is very much a moving piece, and I think they're doing a really excellent job at the moment as we move towards our local plan of the future. Part of the process, of course, at the moment is just slowly moving the local plan in some areas, so we don't have to do the work, duplicate some of the work, if you see what I mean, when the policy guidance work comes through. So there is a twin track in some ways. For some, we have to be cautious because we don't want to do a load of work and then find out it changes. So there's a lot of work going on to make sure we get to the right point at the right time and don't waste any significant time and money. But the officers are working through all that. But it is very much a moving piece, doesn't it? It is a cornerstone of the government's policy to reform the planning system, which is well overdue.
As you said, there's been a lot of planning reforms over the last 18 months to 2 years, and it's still ongoing at this point. It's resulted in substantial policy rewrites, new legislation, primarily in the form of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, some of which the plan elements only came into commencement last week, and the Planning and Infrastructure Act. The scale and pace of reform have been, I think, unprecedented probably since the introduction of the NPPF in 2012. And the government is progressing with a focus on providing certainty in the planning service delivery, not just at a local plan production, but delivery in speedy decision making and delivery of sites that come forward through planning applications. To do this, it wants a more rule-based national planning system, and it wants to have set standards for applicants and developers to ensure consistency. So the report today will focus on some of the current reforms, consultations and emerging reforms. It is important to say that this is just at a point in time, and there is much more guidance and reforms to come. So one of the key reforms has been the overview of the National Planning Policy Framework. A revised draft was published in December 2025 for consultation, and the consultation date closes tomorrow. Consultation comprises of 225 questions on the proposed structure, format, policies and content. And the planning services have worked right across the council, engaging with our other council services who use our plan, and not just in the delivery of their own developments, but also in the delivery of council plan objectives. And we hope by that input that we're providing a more added value response back as part of the consultation. So the NPPS itself has been substantially restructured. It now looks more like a local plan, and it contains 133 policies. First time that it's contained policies, and those are divided between plan-making policies and decision-making policies. Government's intention to do this, again, is to make planning policy more accessible. It's to provide a comprehensive suite of national policies which must be used by all local authorities across the whole of the country. They want to avoid repeating matters in local plans and also for local authorities to deviate from national planning policy. Again, it's aimed at speeding up preparation and preventing unnecessary increase in different standards, which sometimes can complicate developments. Chapter 2 is about plan making. It provides a clear framework that a plan-led approach is still required by the government, and there's a commitment to get universal coverage of local plans across the country as quickly as possible. It sets out a hierarchy of plans, and I've included that at 2.10 of the report. You'll see there's the introduction of spatial development strategies. This is the reintroduction of a sub-regional plan which will look at a vision for growth and change for both housing, employment and infrastructure across the region. So while spatial development strategies are now formalised in MPPF and in the Planning and Infrastructure Act, it's key to note that secondary legislation is still awaited, which will detail that the requirements for their production. Implications for the Kirklees is the need for joint working with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, who will lead on this spatial development strategy, and our adjoining authorities, so that we can make sure that we shape the contents of that it properly reflects the Kirklees local circumstances and the elements of our place we want to progress, as well as our own ambitions through our strategies. The other bit to note in the report is the replacement of supplementary planning documents with supplementary plans. So Liz referred to the supplementary plan, the affordable housing, in her presentation. We will now have to relook at that, at whether the policy framework set out within that complies with the national planning policy, how we then reproduce that in the local plan to get a local perspective for that. The supplementary plans themselves will be limited to locally specific design standards to support the delivery of development, so a much tighter remit of what they can cover. One of the policies I'd like to draw your attention to in the MPPF, I should have said all the plan policies are attached to Appendix 1 of the report, but PM6 sets out the general principles for plan making, and again it restates that local plans should not duplicate, substantially restate or modify national decision making unless directed by other policies within the framework. So the implication of this is that where local plan policies are inconsistent with national decision making policies, the local plan policies will be given limited weight in decision making. As part of our responses back to the consultation, we've been considering whether the new rules-based approach allows the flexibility where required to make decisions which reflect the Kirklees context and may be different to other locations. And again, Liz referred to this in her report about elements of viability, the nature of our topography, which will, the nature of our places, which will all affect our planning decisions. So it's to get a framework that balances that. Chapter 4 retains focus on sustainability, sustainable locations, primarily policies S4, development within settlements, and TR3, which looks at sustainable locations which have a range of access to sustainable transport and are focused close to facilities to avoid that need to travel. You'll also note that there is a number of new annexes that have been input into the MPPF. This collates some of the information that was previously in the national in the MPPF, but also brings together some of the guidance from the National Planning Practice Guidance. So it only brings forward, though, the information required for validation, housing calculation, which is the new standard method, green belt and managing flood risk. A question again that we've asked of the government is what is the weight of the planning practice guidance that still sits within those separate documents? What weight does that have? Currently within the new draft, it just says it's about supporting implementation. The MPPF sets out 12 key reforms for development. Those are set out in your report at 218. But primarily they're about bringing forward development in sustainable locations and bringing forward development which maximises the use of and effectiveness of existing land, brownfield land, looking at densification and how we deliver that contribute to that 1.5 million nationally, but also our 1873 per annum over the plan period. We also have a new plan-making regulation and process. So since I produced the report, new plan-making regulations were laid before Parliament on the 4th of March, and they'll come into effect on the 25th of March. With the implementation of the new regulations, there are new statutory requirements to commence a local plan process. Those are submitting and publishing a notice of intention to commence a new local plan timetable and new scoping consultation requirements. We'll be seeking Cabinet approval to commence on the new plan making system on the 24th of March. What it doesn't mean is that all the work that we've done to date, though, is abortive. The extensive evidence that we've carried out to date, we can carry that forward, subject just to doing a rescoping of it, that it complies with the new MPPF framework. We'll continue to work with internal and external partners on site assessments gathered through the Call for Sites process, and we can build on the early engagement work that's already undertaken. However, it is important to note that within the new statutory requirements, the scoping consultation must take place after the notice of intention and the new plan timetable is published, so there will be some duplicated work. We need to do all that within a minimum of 4 months before we can progress to Gateway 1 and subject. Gateway 1 is where we seek an independent assessment from the planning inspectorate of whether the work we've done to date meets their requirements. Subject to that, we then progress on the prescribed 30-month plan making period. And you'll find diagrams at 24 and 25 that illustrate that process. The government is making funds available to do to progress on the new plan making system. Kirklees has already successfully got money towards our evidence gathering, and we put in an expression of interest for further funding in January. The decision was supposed to be made on the 6th of March, but that's been pushed back to the middle of March. So hopefully we'll be successful in that. Another key consultation that's ongoing at the moment, but it closes tomorrow, is consultation on the design and placemaking planning practice guidance. This Proposed new PPG will consolidate the 4 existing national design documents, which include the National Design Guide, Design Processes and Tools, and the National Model Design Codes Part 1 and 2, and hopefully bring that together in a streamlined, more accessible resource. The PPG is structured around 7 elements of well-designed places: livability, climate resistance, nature, movement, built form, public space and identity. And to repeat what the previous speakers have said about making homes that have longevity and meet the needs of the communities, particularly around the energy efficiency and the costs of being able to live in those homes. It also explains how guidance should be applied in practice through local design codes. And this marks a change from the previous national guidance, which was looking for a district authority-wide design code. We can now focus on areas such as strategic allocations or master plan areas, and that local designs codes. And I think that's probably going to be much more beneficial to us in the long run moving forward. So Planning and Infrastructure Act came into force at the end of 2025. I've listed a number of key parts of that which will influence the planning service in the future. So Section 53 of the Act empowers the Secretary of State to introduce mandatory training for planning committees and subcommittees, and also will introduce a national scheme of delegation, both of which the government hopes will speed up the decision-making process. We are now waiting for regulations to enact those, so we'll need to come back to members at a later date on that. Section 51 and 52 of the Act empower the Secretary of State to make regulations to enable local planning authorities to set their own planning fees and impose a surcharge on planning fees. These changes are intended to increase the resources available to planning teams and statutory consultees, again with the focus on speeding up the process and the quality of decision making. Again, we're waiting for further guidance and regulations on those. I've spoken about the spatial development strategies. They will be produced by strategic planning authorities. In our case, that will be the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. And as I said earlier, while they are now enforced through the Act, we need to have the legislation, secondary legislation for the detail on those. We had a consultation that closed in January on reforms to statutory consultees. And the key elements of that were about whether certain statutory consultees should be removed from the process. They reviewed the scope of what each of the statutory consultees would advise on, and they looked at performance management. So our statutory consultees, as with ourselves, have got an increasing amount of workload. They're trying to respond to both plan making and to decision making. So the consultation was about how their resources could be used to best effect. From Kirklees' point of view, we're very keen to get the involvement of statutory consultees early in the process, particularly within the plan making. That helps us to mitigate about any risks of progressing with either sites or the strategies, policies moving forward. And you'll have seen their contribution within the development management decisions. So just in summary, as I said, not all the rules are in place yet. We're getting a much clearer picture of what we need to go, and we are getting the necessary legislation and requirements is emerging to get these processes in place. There is a need for continued partnership working particularly with the spatial development strategy. As I said, to get the benefits of positioning Kirklees within that strategy. And there will be a key element for training, not just of members, but also of our staff, and raising awareness with our customers and our applicants on new processes and timetables. Any questions?
Thank you. Before we move on to questions, could I just ask members to be mindful that this is a planning reform and a lot of what's been presented hasn't actually come into force yet, and if you can avoid any site-specific questions. Thank you. Questions? Councillor Munro?
Thank you, Chair. I just got a few really, as it's in a draft stage, so to speak. So the 2.18, a permanent presumption in favour of suitably located development, a permanent presumption. Can you just explain what that actually means in real terms, please?
The previous MPPF talked about sustainability in the broad, and it was principled right the way through it. Within the draft MPPF, that still exists, but there is a very strong focus across the plan policies about sustainable locations and putting development in a sustainable location. So I said the key one for that policy is S4, which is development within settlements, and within that making the best use of land and increasing densities within it. So there are other policies in the plan, L1, 2 and 3, that look at the use of land and densification. They talk about setting minimum densities within town centres where there's good connectivity to public transport, and looking at densities in other areas. Key theme is about sustainable links to sustainable transport. As I said, that's TR3. And the access to facilities. So as part of our work to inform the local plan, we're looking at urban capacity studies, we're re-looking at settlement hierarchies to try and shape that narrative moving forward. But in terms of that presumption, to answer your question, it's very much a focus of that we need to look at our urban areas settlements first, and then look at a sequence of opportunities for shaping our spatial strategy if we can't do that.
I'm sorry, I've got two further questions. So with regard to building homes around stations, including on Greenbelt land, that seems to me that they're changing the purpose of Greenbelt. And the other, well, it's not really a question, that was just something I've noted. And with regard to point 3, driving urban and suburban densification, you know, some areas have been become more urbanised or suburbanised, if there's such an expression, due to the impacts of the last local plan. And so that means, that could mean for those areas that they're going to become even more dense from suburban to a more of an urban area in the future, if with regard to point 3 of this of these changes. Is that correct? Or, thank you.
It's true that they've put in policy GB7 about train stations and that's part of looking at development that is in sustainable locations.
Could you just use your mic, please?
Do you want me to repeat all of that? Sorry. So the draft MPPF does set out about higher densities around train stations. Again, it's trying to locate development in what they see as sustainable locations. That shouldn't be looked at in isolation. It still has to be appropriate for the quality of that area. We've got to look at the access to facilities, the impact on the character of the landscape is also being quoted. And there must be a demonstrable unmet need for that development in that area. It talks about, as I said, increased densities as a way of trying to secure the numbers that we need to meet through our development requirements. We know from experience of our planning applications that because of the topography of the landscape, the viability again, the nature of our area, the quality of that landscape, that fixed density across the whole of the Kirklees place is not likely to be achievable or have benefits. So we are looking at what that means for our area and feeding back on that. And again, a lot of the focus of our comments through the NPPF is we understand why these measures are being promoted, but do we have the flexibility to look at the quality of the Kirklees place?
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. It's it really helpful getting the head around the actual NBPF changes, because there was a huge amount of information on the consultation site. I'm just trying to get my head around the relationship between the local plan at a council level and the spatial development strategy at the West Yorkshire level. I appreciate the policy of Kirklees is to get us to align them as close as possible, which is the sensible way forward. But to what extent is the spatial development plan or the local plan, which one takes precedence if there's a dispute, for example? And I appreciate the spatial development strategy, I'm going to get the names wrong consistently, is a broader based plan, but obviously there's still potential for conflicts between them. So I guess what are the mechanisms for resolving those, or is that something that has to be taken on a case-by-case basis? Thank you.
The picture of this is emerging because we haven't got all the rules yet. But I think to look at the positives of a spatial development strategy, to get agreement on strategic infrastructure across West Yorkshire that Kirklees can feed into, I think will help our economic aspirations that's set out in our economic strategy. It could help wider sort of council plan objectives. So we're keen to work within that. And from Councillor Crook's point of view, this probably sets a framework for also looking at the mass transit and the council's commitment to looking at spatial development framework. So that could be part of the strategic infrastructure that's looked at. It also looks at the infrastructure for regional-wide energy efficiency, which has to have you'd want to have a benefit for Kirklees. But yes, we'll have within that, we're going to have our own aspirations. So that's why I'm keen, and the team are already working with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority to feed in our expectations of what our strategies are already saying, what our evidence might say, so we can shape the debate on that. We've already shared our initial findings on the settlement hierarchy to again do that debate. In terms of conflict, we need to, the duty to cooperate is going to be replaced, but the draft MPPF refers to maintaining cooperation. So we'll need to take those local and strategic issues back at every stage through the alignment of it. So we need to keep an eye on our timetable, their timetable. And there's one thing I was going to say and I've forgotten. Yes, at Gateway 2 and 3, we have to get a statement from the Strategic Planning Authority that they are generally in agreement with our local plan. Now, it doesn't have to agree with it totally, but we have to get that general agreement. So ongoing work right the way through the process is absolutely key. Which one will take precedence? I can only assume it's going to be the regional one, but Matthias can come back on that.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, Joe's correct on what she's just said, but I think the driving point is local planning authorities, the council, will still decide where housing goes, how many houses we should get, and how we plan for those. The spatial strategy won't deal with that level of detail. So in effect, the challenge really is for us to find the land. Working at a regional level gives us some flexibility. Some districts may or may not want to share housing need, and that could be a potential way of dealing with our housing challenges. But historically, every district across West Yorkshire has, in effect, consumed their own smoke, provided for their own housing and job needs within their district. I can't imagine that changing. However, a spatial strategy might give that flexibility to have a conversation about it. But ultimately, housing's dealt with by the district, and that won't change, I don't think. Hope that helps.
Do you have a supplementary?
Just quickly to say, yeah, I think the policy the officer put forward is the right one, about, you know, working together with the combined authority. And this is, the only thing I would add is probably a more political point that I wouldn't expect officers to answer, but it's just, I sit on the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Scrutiny Committee, and we haven't looked at this specifically, but we have looked at things like the growth plan and all of that, and it's just about, I suppose, there's a perception by the authorities that are not leads, that sometimes that kind of we have to push a little bit harder at a combined authority level just to make our voices heard. And it's just to make that point. I don't expect an answer to this, it's just more of a comment. But yeah, that's a political point that I don't expect officers to answer, really.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, and thanks, John. Thanks for the presentation, but also it's clear in the communication of that you've got underneath this and you understand what the ask is really. In a sense, I'm echoing Councillor Munro a little bit about one of my concerns about definitions around sustainability, definitions around connectivity at train stations. What does good connectivity look like? Because the developer will see a train station within 5 miles of where they want to build, and they'll see that as the most important train station in the country. I don't know whether there will be anything that comes through this process that gives any form of definition, or whether it's going to end up being a number of appealed cases to establish case law. But that's one of my little worries. We've got a train line that I often talk about in this chamber. I'm sure members will be aware. But the service isn't great, and it's certainly not one currently that would be a commutable service, because it's very difficult to get a train back. It's not so bad going out in the morning, but coming home at night is difficult, and the connections at Huddersfield are poor. But I could see developers going, got a train station? Yeah, we can build anywhere. Similarly with the sustainability and access to services and facilities. I mean, a developer's definition of a service and facility sometimes stretches credibility. And I do wonder how we, as an authority, will be able to defend that in terms of what is sustainable, what genuinely is sustainable, where are there access to facilities that are accessible. And I particularly worry if we're going to, and rightly, we talked earlier about the need for social housing. If we're going to have developers wanting to build significant chunks of social housing in areas that have very poor transport connections, don't have access to local facilities or shops for people who may not have access to cars, you're putting those people in a very, very difficult position, and that the more rural it is, the more difficult it is for them to access services, and that bit worries me. But I don't know whether there's anything you can say, but I suspect it's the devil's in the detail, I guess, is it?
Only to say that we have picked up that point within our responses back to the government, say, particularly on the station issue that you said, you know, how close does it need to be, definitions of sustainability and connectivity, and I can make sure that that's reinforced again as part of any response.
Do you have any further questions, supplementary? Any further questions? Oh, Councillor Taylor.
Just to follow on what John says, and he's right about developers will say, oh, 5 miles is not so bad. And that's always been the issue for not just us, every planning authority in the country. The developers have a different view on the world than perhaps the councils and local elected members have. And there's always been that, not conflict, but that difference of opinion about. And they look at it from a purely financial point of view, don't they? We try to look at it from a more socially responsible point of view. So there's always been a bit of a, not conflict, but difference of opinion, shall we say. Well, I'll use the word conflict then, if you want conflict. So, but that's the nature of the beast, isn't it? They're a commercial organisation. Their responsibility is either their shareholders or their owners, if they're SMEs. So yes, there will be a certain amount of discussion. And I suspect you're right, they'll have to go to appeal and set some case law. As is always the case in planning, I feel that somebody has to make a decision and go, that's where it's heading. And that's a challenge over the next few years, isn't it? But you're right. Some might say, I'm not saying there are some developers out there that 10 miles is not a bad thing for a train station. But hey-ho, we are where we are. But I'm welcoming this report, and I'm welcoming the fact that we are finally, after many years of a system that wasn't delivering for the commercial sector, wasn't delivering for residents, it's definitely time for an overhaul of the planning system, and I think that'll help the commercial side with the businesses anyway, so they'll have a better understanding of what they can and can't do over the next few years, and obviously help residents and future residents with some homes, because, you know, it's one of the few things that's emerged over the last few years that every single major political party admits we have a housing crisis. So whether all these reforms will address that, we'll have to wait and see, but at least it's heading in the right direction, I believe.
Thank you. Any further questions? So I just have a few comments stroke concerns with regards to the NPPF being a policy-based system, which I expect will be very descriptive as well. How much, and the fact that those will be given more weight rather than local policy, which is a bit concerning, especially when you've got sites, area-specific, for example, the built form. How do you see that conflict playing out? I appreciate it. You will struggle to answer the question, but I'll give you a bash.
We've got to be very aware that if the draft NPPF does come into force, those policies will be set and we'll have to comply with them. In terms of what we're doing at the moment on the basis of this and what the programme moving forward is, that we will be looking at our existing local plan policies, we'll be looking at the emerging evidence and looking at specific local circumstances that we think would justify a local policy position on that. We're also seeking, through the consultation itself, some more clarification on the flexibility that we've got and in how we can assess local issues. So the pitch, in answer to your question, it's emerging. We know it's an issue, and we are looking for the ways of moving our way forward for that. The introduction of the gateway tests, there will be 3 gateway tests, gives us an early opportunity to have a discussion on whether our evidence and our policy approach is going to be found sound before it gets to an examination process. So again, we need to take full advantage of that as we move forward. I haven't got all the answers yet, but I do share your concerns about it.
So basically, if the NPPF changes come in and the policies introduced, then our policies then preferably would align, or we would try to get them to align. Is that where we're going with this? So basically, when they go to examination, we are found sound. Yeah. So my other concern basically was, and I'm going to use an example, in a policy example, P1, safe and clean places. How do you regulate clean? How does planning do that? I appreciate you will be finding it difficult to answer this, but there are other regulatory powers. Planning does not override them. So I think and this is going down to a little bit of detail, I think the issue would be, is your public out there who would see that policy and say, well, actually, you know, planning must do this for me because of the fact that, and it's explaining to them that we don't have that power, but it's a policy that's there. So has this been raised as a concern?
I will have to check for you. I can't recall offhand. Our public health colleagues have looked at all these policies, so I'll check in against what they've said, and we can raise that. There's still time before tomorrow to insert some comments on that. Is that okay?
That's brilliant, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Bamforth?
It's just a quick one on grey belt. It seems to be a bit of a hazy definition. Have you gone back in the consultation and asked for any firming up of the grey belt issue? And can we see any issues coming down the line from let's say, speculative developments saying that land is grey belt and when it's blatantly green in some cases?
We're currently producing a piece of evidence known as the parcel analysis, which will map the entire green belt in Kirklees, every aspect of it. That'll appraise it, that'll test its quality, and that will also identify in the consultant's opinion, who have done it for us, whether they think that land could be classed as grey belt and meet the tests in the MPPF. When that's done, and we've digested it, we'll be able to share that with members and the public eventually, because it'll be a public piece of information that will support the local plan. You do need to be aware we have a significant amount of green belt in Kirklees. Almost 70% of the district is green belt, there and thereabouts. We don't have a lot of towns, as defined by what the MPPF would say is a town. Therefore, there is a potential we will have a lot of grey belt opportunities, but at this time we're still producing the evidence, and developers, as you know, are circling and looking for opportunities all the time. But the way to ensure that you maintain control over how you plan developments and what you want to approve is to progress your local plan. And if it's up to date and you have a 5-year land supply, then development in what could be grey belt, you may be able to say no to at that stage, if you want to. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just follow on from that? Is there a checklist that planners are looking at the moment? Would you kind of run through those as well? Thank you.
I can't do it right here and now, but effectively the MPPF, when it introduced the concept of the grey belt in green belt locations, there's guidance within those chapters of the MPPF that you follow in a sequential basis. There are some exemptions. And we've been using that as our toolkit to advise developers, because we are getting asked through our pre-application processes and through planning applications now for decisions for housing developments in the green belt where they think grey belt could be applicable. So we've simply been following what the MPPF says. I do recognise members, not just in this room but across the council, would like some further support and guidance on it. And I'm through Graham and Moses, we're happy to do that when the time's right. I think the evidence piece is the critical timing when we've completed that parcel analysis for you to be able to say, here's your entire district, and you can go to individual parcels of land within your ward, across the district, and we can give an analysis of why or why not it can be considered grey belt. And at that time we could give you some training as well on how the officers are working it through. Is that helpful? Is that a reasonable time frame? That's sort of in this summer to autumn, if you wanted a timeline, if that's helpful, Chair.
So in terms of, that's great to hear, to be honest. But just whittling down to your analysis. For example, are we looking at the transport infrastructure and viability as part of that analysis as well?
Not so much viability, because there are golden rules that apply to people who want to bring forward housing developments. They must deliver for Kirklees at the minute, 35% affordable homes above our 20% baseline. They must deliver all the open space requirements, the BNGs. They aren't able to negotiate viability on those. If they have a viability issue, they can't come forward and say it's grey belt, we should deliver it. In instances where they don't make that case, then we are looking at sustainability as a key component of whether, and the debate earlier was very timely on that matter. We have a lot of rural locations. We have a lot of sites that are difficult to access other than by private car, and the thrust of planning guidance is to reduce private travel in individual cars to improve our climate emergency response. It's difficult because we've got poor connectivity in bus and train in some of our locations. That being said, not everywhere that might meet a grey belt test is sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, you have a strong case to say it shouldn't be approved through a planning application. So it's still a balance, but it's a key consideration, sustainability, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions? Right, I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you everyone for your attendance.